Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly Meyer, and I'm serving as the facilitator this evening for the FAFSA 101 presentation, presented to you jointly by StriveScan and the Indiana Association for College Admission Counseling. Thank you, families, for being with us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can get some housekeeping items taken care of here. All right, so this is a virtual college exploration program for all Indiana students. We want to make sure you know how to ask questions this evening because your camera and your microphone are off, so the presenters are not able to hear you. So if you have a question for our presenters, all you have to do is use the Q&A button to type your questions, and they will be able to get to those later in the presentation. We also encourage you to sign up for more sessions. We have these sessions running all the way through the next couple of weeks. This is one of many presentations offered. This week we're doing panel presentations on different college topics, and then in the next couple of weeks we'll have college and university information sessions. You can check out the schedule there at that link. In addition, there will be a recording available for this session. If you have any questions, you can let us know. But otherwise, feel free to check that out if you have to leave early or if you want to share this with some friends. In addition, I'd also like to remind you that since this is the FAFSA 101 session, we are very lucky to have a few admission financial aid representatives here. So these are aid administrators and financial aid professionals. So if you have questions this evening about general admissions or general information regarding these universities, I'd like to encourage you to check out the university information sessions. University of Evansville will be Monday, October 12th at 6 p.m. Wabash College will be Tuesday, October 13th at 5 p.m. and Purdue University will be Wednesday, October 14th at 7 p.m. and all of those times are Eastern times. With all of that being said, I hope you enjoy the presentation and I will go ahead and kick it off with our presenters.
Good evening, everyone. As we get our slides going, I'll go ahead and jump in and start our presentation. So thank you for joining us for the FAFSA 101 presentation. My name is Heidi Carl, and I'm the Executive Director of Financial Aid at Purdue University. I'm going to hand it over to my two colleagues who are joining me to introduce themselves, and then we'll get going with the presentation.
I'm Sean Riley. I'm a financial aid counselor from the University of Evansville.
And I am Alex Delonis, Director of Financial Aid from Wabash College. Excited to be with you all.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I'm going to go ahead and kick off our presentation this evening, and then you'll be hearing from Sean and Alex. So tonight, the topics that we would like to discuss with you, we're going to first start by talking about the FSA ID. And the FSA ID is your signature for the FAFSA form. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about the free application for federal student aid, or known to all of you and all of us as the FAFSA. We'll talk for a little bit about special circumstances. We know, especially this year, given everything that we've all been going through with the pandemic, that this is an important topic. And then obviously we have left plenty of time at the end of our conversation today to take questions. The only note I would make about questions is please remember that this is a public forum, and we want to make sure that the questions that we answer for you today are general in nature. We know that financial aid can be very specific, especially as we talk through tax information, family information. Alex, Sean, and I are all available outside of the presentation tonight if you would like to discuss something with us at a later date or time, but we're happy to take all of your general questions tonight. So we'll do that at the end of the presentation. Again, just a reminder to put those in the chat feature, the Q&A, and we will read those at the end of the presentation. So let's talk a little bit about the FSA ID. This is used to complete the FAFSA, And it also allows students to be able to access different Department of Education websites. Probably one of the most popular websites you use this for is the Student Loan Database website, to be able to do things that you will need to do later with that. It is used by the student, and at least one parent has to have an FSA ID, and that will work throughout the financial aid process. It's very important that you keep track of this information because you will use it in subsequent years. So it's not something that you use just 1 year. You'll use it for your entire college career, both undergraduate and graduate, if you were to go on to get a degree beyond your bachelor's degree. So you definitely want to hold on to that information. Each person, as we note there, only the owner should create an FSA ID. So remember, one for the student and one for at least a parent, and they will have to be unique. And we have the website there for you where you go to the federal government to be able to create your FSA ID. That's something you can do right now. The FAFSA is open, but you can also go ahead and get your FSA ID created. So let's talk about the free application for federal student aid, or as we refer to it as the FAFSA. The FAFSA is used to collect your basic demographic information, name, address, age, social security number, but it's also used to be able to gather financial information both from the student and his or her parent or parents. And so it will have both tax information and asset information for both the student and the parent. All of the questions on the FAFSA then are used to be able to calculate the expected family contribution, or EFC. And basically, that is then used by colleges to be able to put together a financial aid offer for students. It is used to look at both the federal government aid, as well as in the state of Indiana. The state of Indiana uses the FAFSA for colleges to be able to tell you what state grant funding is available. And then many colleges and universities will use the FAFSA any institutional funds that they will award you as well. So it's a very important that the FAFSA is available in English and Spanish. So that's a very important piece of the FAFSA.
Heidi, I believe you're cutting in and out a little bit. You are on my end in both. I'm seeing it in the Q&A. Alex, are you getting the same thing?
Okay, sorry about that. I had a pop-up that said I wasn't connected. Am I connected now? Can you hear me?
At the moment, yes.
Okay. Well, let's hope that we can keep going here. I'll keep my fingers crossed. The free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, can be filed anytime during the academic year, but it started on October 1st, and you will want to complete it prior to the academic year that you're requesting aid. So for students who are going to go to college in the 2021-22 academic year, they will want to start filing the FAFSA now. And you will want to stay in contact with the colleges and universities that you're considering attending. Some of them will have priority dates that you need to file, maybe February 1st, March 1st. So it's very important that you stay in contact with all of those different colleges and universities to see if they have a priority filing date. So there are a number of different ways for you to be able to fill out the FAFSA. And this chart that is coming up on the screen will show you that there is a web version, there is a myStudentAid mobile application. If you need a paper that from the department, but there is FAFSA on the phone. And if for some reason you have access to the internet and you need assistance, you can always go to a college or university where they can help you through a process that we have called FAA Access to CPA.
I think Heidi's paused. You're back. Oh, it looks like you're back.
Okay, sorry. One of the great things about using FAFSA on the web or myStudentAid, which are the electronic forms, are that they have built-in edits to prevent costly errors. And they also allow skip logic, which means that if you answer a question in a certain manner, it will automatically go over questions that you don't need to answer. So that's what's really nice about those electronic formats, is that they allow the student or parent to skip those unnecessary questions. The other great thing about the electronic formats are that you can use the Internal Revenue Service data retrieval tool to import your tax data. And this is very important for accuracy and ease of transferring that information. Also, it really allows you a timely transmission of getting your application in, because it's submitted online right away. And then if you need to go back later and make corrections, you can. The online version also has a lot of extra help that you can toggle over to be able to see additional instructions for common questions that you have. And you can check your application status while you're online. The hope is that we will also have a simplified application process in the future. So look for more information about that in future years. I'm going to go ahead now and hand it over to Sean, and he'll take over our presentation from here.
Thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about the specifics of what the FAFSA is actually going to ask you for. So this screenshot here is from the government site studentaid.gov, which is more or less an informational tool for all types of financial aid. But what's circled there is a link for Apply for Aid. That would actually also just link you to the FAFSA website, fafsa.gov. So in years past, there's been .coms and .nets and .orgs, and I think the government has finally shut all of those down to where fafsa.gov is the one site that you want to go to. When you get into the login process, you will have the option as either a student to log in, or if you're a parent logging in for your student, you can check either box there. My recommendation always, at least for the first year that a student is filing the FAFSA, both student and parent should sit down together and complete the process as a team. Help each other out with some of those common errors that can go through, because the FAFSA is not nearly as difficult as it is intimidating to many families. But when you're working through it together, it goes a lot easier. And also to make sure while you're answering questions, to be aware, is the question about the student or the parent? Similarly, on the myStudentAid app that Heidi had mentioned, your first step after logging in is to notify FAFSA whether you're the student or the parent. There's an option there for you're a preparer as well. Much less common, but it is possible for, say, your tax preparer to also submit your FAFSA for you. As Heidi had mentioned, that IRS data retrieval tool, it allows for that tax information to be imported directly from the IRS to your FAFSA, and will answer the vast majority of the financial questions for you. And those financial questions have always historically been the pieces of FAFSA that students and parents get most intimidated by. So there's a piece within the FAFSA that allows you to link your identity into the IRS's website and then link that tax record back into the FAFSA. It reduces your chances that your FAFSA is going to be inaccurate, which is an inaccurate FAFSA is going to mean your aid that's offered to you by the schools could potentially be inaccurate. And it will also reduce the risk that financial aid offices have to collect your tax data to make sure that your FAFSA is filed correctly. Not everyone can use the data retrieval tool. The chart here shows a few reasons why. Before you can choose data retrieval, you have to first say that you've already filed that year's taxes. The next one, your marriage date is January 2020 or later. The converse of that is true. If you had filed a joint tax return for tax year 2019 and you are now divorced or separated, you would not be able to use the data retrieval tool to import that tax return. Your first 3 digits of your social are 666 or all zeros. You filed a non-US tax return. You filed as married. You filed as head of household, but you were married, or you filed separate tax returns. The data retrieval tool is only able to pull in one tax return. So if you're a married couple that files separately, it can't pull both of them in for you. Or if your parents, neither married parent has entered a valid social security number to be able to do that data pull. Some general items that the FAFSA will ask for: your social security number, your citizenship status. So students can be eligible for aid by being a US citizen or an eligible non-citizen. The student's marital status, whether a student has been convicted of drug possession or sale. Selective service registration. All males under 24 are required to register for selective service. And it'll also ask the highest level of education completed by your parents. The student dependency status questions, these are, this general section of questions tends to be one of the most asked items to financial aid professionals by first-time FAFSA filers. There is a series of questions that determine whether you're a dependent student, which means you have to put parents on your FAFSA, or whether you're an independent student and you can file FAFSA with just yourself. They start with what your age is, whether you're married, whether you have children that you're financially supporting. There's a few other ones, such as you're in a legal guardianship. Basically, if you can answer yes to any of those questions, you're an independent student. If you answer no to all of them, you are dependent. And you don't have the option to simply say, my parents don't claim me on taxes. I want to claim myself as an independent student for FAFSA. You have to meet the actual requirements to be independent. Information about the parents that the FAFSA will ask for is very similar to what they ask for students in terms of your tax income, other financial information, most of which can be pulled in by the data retrieval tool. It will ask if you're a dislocated worker. There's a question on there that says yes, no, or I don't know for that. A dislocated worker, the definition really is, have you been laid off? It asks if you've received means tested federal benefits in the previous 2 years, what your assets are, and untaxed income. Assets and untaxed income are two sections that Heidi had mentioned earlier on the skip logic. As you're going with the online FAFSA, depending on how your tax information has been entered, it may not ask you some of those additional information about your assets or about untaxed income. Same questions for just the student or an independent student who's also married. It'll ask the same questions that's for the parents, taxes, dislocated worker, etc. Additional information you're going to put on your FAFSA, you will list the colleges that you would like to receive your FAFSA. You can report up to 10 colleges on your FAFSA at one time. That doesn't mean you can only send your information to 10 schools. It just means after you have submitted that FAFSA, you can go in and edit your FAFSA to remove or add different schools to it as well. So if right now you're still very open, you can list several schools on your FAFSA and they will all be able to receive that information to be able to offer you an aid package. You'll list your housing plan at each school. Some schools you may be thinking that you're going to live locally at home and commute, so there's a with family option on there. Other schools you'll have to live on campus, so you would list that. Your housing plans do have an impact on the type of financial aid you receive depending on the college you're at. And then there's information about a FAFSA preparer if a preparer is helping you file the FAFSA. Signatures that are required, the student will always have to file the FAFSA. And for dependent students, one parent will file the FAFSA. You can file electronically through the FSA ID, through printing a signature page, or by signing on the paper FAFSA. Those signature page and paper FAFSA, I would discourage. The FSA ID will be your friend for the next 4+ years as your student. You're going to need it. Each year you file the FAFSA, each year you're dealing with student loans, and then anytime you're going to need information about your loan history down the line, your FSA ID is your friend. Get used to using it and knowing what it is and keeping it secure. And frequent FAFSA errors, I think this is my last slide. Social Security numbers. As silly as sometimes it sounds, inputting your wrong Social Security number is one of the biggest issues on the FAFSA that is hardest to correct. More or less you have to start over. And a lot of times when parents are completing a FAFSA for their children and say you have 2 or 3 kids, it's very easy to transpose a number. So if you just have your Social Security card in front of you as you get started, and prevent that error from starting. Divorced, widowed, and remarried parental information. It's not asking the marital status of your biological parents. It's asking what the parent who you live with or who supports you in the last year, what that parent's marital status. So if they've now been remarried, then that'll be that parent and your step parent. Untaxed income is a frequent one. Income taxes paid, household size. If you have questions as you're going through these questions, how to answer or what they're referring to as a household size or taxes paid, as Heidi mentioned, as you hover over any of the questions in the FAFSA, a pop-up window will appear that kind of has an explanation as to what they're asking for. And I'll give it to Alex.
All right, thanks, Sean. So you've done your FAFSA, and this is kind of showing you the cycle of where it goes from there. So first, it goes through many databases for a few checks, like the Social Security Administration, Department of Homeland Security, Selective Service, and all of that is processed through the federal government. And then the school is given a copy of the FAFSA of whose school codes that you listed. And then the student is also delivered a SAR, a student aid report, or a different version that we'll get to, of the information that you listed on the FAFSA. So depending on how you completed the FAFSA and what information you provided is how what type of SAR you will receive. So this is the kind of a transcript of what a SAR might look like, your student aid report, and line by line you can see the FAFSA on the web version, the mobile version. It was super sleek, and the information you put in and the skip logic. This is just straight up the question and the answer. So you can kind of verify the information you put. If you didn't put an email, one would be mailed to you. If you did put a valid email address, you should receive an electronic notification or a SAR acknowledgement. I'd encourage you to review that. This is the one that the student aid report acknowledgement, what you're seeing there with the family address on it, that's the paper version that you would see in the mail if you didn't put an email address. again, take a look. Usually, we as aid administrators, if there are any flags, we would let you know too, or you might be selected for something called verification, where we would verify some of the information that you put on the FAFSA to ensure it was correct. And this is what our side looks like. So this is the fun that Sean and Heidi and I get to have every day, looking at all of these ICERs and helping determine your eligibility. So making corrections. So if you put in something that wasn't correct, that's what we're here to help with. You can always go in and make those corrections yourself, going in using FAFSA on the web. They'll ask you to input your FSA ID just to validate that the right person is getting into the right record. You can also update it by paper. I would not recommend that unless you absolutely have to. It will take a lot longer, but you can also work, if you do get to that point, please work with the aid administrator at an institution to help you through the process. And then you may have to submit some documentation to us. So it could be one form, it could be no forms, it could be taxes, it could be bank account information. We will, the institutions will be as clear as we possibly can to let you know what documents we need to push things forward to get you that aid notification at the end. And then special circumstances. So as Heidi mentioned in the opening, 2020 has not been everyone's friend with everything that's been going on. So that's where we're here to help. We can do something, an exercise, what we call professional judgment, to try to give a more accurate picture of your financial situation as we move into the academic year. Now, I will say every school is going to be different in this process. Every school is going to be different in the documentation they ask for and things that they will approve or consider. So please work with each school individually, and it is not uncommon for two schools to come up with a different determination. So I don't want that to be to catch you off guard, but we will ask for information. We'll review it, and as it says below, if the institution's decision is final, that's why I bring up that, you know, if Heidi says one thing in Wabash and I say one thing at Wabash, it's okay. You know, we have your best interest in mind, but our institutional policies just might be different. And then these are some things that we consider as far as special circumstances go. So if there are medical or dental expenses, if a parent or a spouse passed away and we need to remove income, if a parent lost employment, if there is extraordinary childcare. I have a 1-year-old. I know exactly what that looks like, so I get it. Divorce, separation, anytime we need to take a tax return and manipulate it as far as kind of separating income, that's something that we can do. Secondary school tuition, and then if the student cannot obtain parental information. Sean did a really good job of covering that dependency status. There are some extreme exceptions, and you would want to work with your aid administrator if you genuinely can't answer any of the dependency questions, yes, but still cannot obtain parent information. That's something that you would work with us on. All right. So we have about 15 minutes remaining for questions. We will be monitoring the Q&A here. Does anyone have any questions? Or has one might have come in, I wasn't looking.
Yeah, one came in and I posted the answer to them. So hopefully the open answer dismissed on their end looks good.
Awesome. Whoops.
Would we recommend an EFC calculator, and which one? Personally, I would not recommend an EFC calculator. I mean, your EFC is going to be what your EFC is based on the FAFSA answers. And now that the FAFSA is available to be filed, we're past October 1st, I would say just go ahead and file it, and you would receive what your EFC is. And then from there, if there's something like Alex mentioned for special circumstances, if there's something that the FAFSA doesn't really cover, such as change in income or out-of-pocket medical expenses, something that's special to you, work with your financial aid office about, telling your story.
And to add to that, yeah, the EFC calculators were a lot more important when the FAFSA was only available on January 1st and used same year income. And now that we're working 2 years back, most folks have generally filed those. But yeah, you can also try to use an institution's net price calculator too, which might help, but that might not get to the EFC portion of your question.
Yeah, and I would definitely add that the net price calculator at each institution that you're considering is a great tool for you to look at. So someone asked what the website is for the FSA ID, and the short version of that is FSA ID, all one word, fsaid.ed.gov. If you type that in, you should be able to get to that. So the question came in, how about estimating your EFC as a junior in high school?
I think that's where what you guys mentioned on the net price calculator could help us go a step in that direction.
One thing that I'd caution going that early is questions about household size, because that's a huge factor in determining eligibility. And if you're using kind of estimates from 4, 5, 6 years out, your household size may change by the time you actually file your FAFSA, as well as other things too, investments, income. I personally think that would be pushing it, trying to go that far out. But you could try to get a rough estimate. Things you just have to take into consideration that things over time by the time you actually need it.
The next question that came in is for early college applications. Does FAFSA need to be completed by the November 1st early applicant deadline? And that's a good one. And that's where when I talked about really paying attention to the deadlines for your specific college or university, because it depends on what the college requirements are. Some schools will ask you to have your FAFSA submitted if you're applying through like an early decision or an early action round. Others, however, keep their application for admission and their financial aid applications very separate. And so there could be a later date for filing that FAFSA. So you want to inquire with each school. Sean or Alex, anything you want to add?
I would just add that your FAFSA result isn't going to be different October the 10th than it will be January the 10th, because it's based on the same tax information. So if you can go ahead and get it filed and get it in the hands of your school so they can work with you now to do it now. In any year, let alone the 2020, but in any year, colleges are always working on a tight budget where they're wondering, how do we get as many students in to us for admission as possible? And sometimes discount rate and scholarships and need-based financial aid from schools can change as the year goes on based on how many applicants are in. So if you're one of the earlier applicants, you may have more opportunity for aid.
Yeah, the earlier the better, and just talking to each school specifically on what they might require by each deadline.
So the next question is, are there any special recommendations or pitfalls to consider for 21st century scholars when applying for financial aid, for the FAFSA, sorry.
I can take the first shot at this.
Sure.
Obviously, applying early will be key. I know in my experience, just keeping up with credit completion and everything that you're supposed to be doing along the way, become best friends with your Scholar Track account, and just monitor, making sure you're meeting every benchmark, every requirement. Because you might, we don't want you to receive a letter, a letter in the mail letting you know an award has changed or you're now ineligible a few semesters down the road. I'm just thinking of the word pitfall, like what could go wrong. But as long as you're filing early, doing everything that you're supposed to do to follow up with the institution, and completing the proper coursework and the amount of coursework you're supposed to along the way and meeting the state's requirements. I know I said that like it's the easiest thing in the world to do, but yeah, that's all you have to do to maintain your award and continue being eligible.
Yeah, I would agree with Alex. Remember, you have to file the FAFSA every year. So even though, that award gives you 8 semesters of eligibility, you still have to file a FAFSA every single year to be eligible for it. And the credit completion that Alex talked about is when you get to college, you have to make sure you're completing the credits you enroll in. And I think an important thing to remember is typically you can use summer to catch up if you don't get enough credits in fall and spring semesters. So if you're worried that you're not going to get your 21st Century Award the following fall, go talk with your advisor or the financial aid office. Try to pick up some courses in the summer to make up for your shortfall and stay eligible, definitely. And
be aware if you're doing that, picking up the summer to catch up, you're tending to pay for summer.
Correct. Good point, Sean.
School scholarships aren't your 21st Century, your Pell Grant's already used. Well, you may have Pell. Most of your aid is already used, and summer's going to be out of pocket.
Yeah.
And they keep
adding about too, because some schools may have scholarships they offer to help you stay on track to get your 21st century.
Mm-hmm. And the state, I think we're into the cycle where we have all of the new benchmarks for 21st century applicants. So as Alex mentioned, make Scholar Track your friend so that you know what you have to do as a college student aside from the 30 hours of completion, the participation in an activity. There's all kinds of requirements related to 21st century scholars now.
Great questions. Keep them coming. We still have a few more minutes here.
I think one of the tips that I would make sure families understand is you don't see it quite so much now since we are using like a previous year's tax data, but it's really important that you get your application filed by the state deadline if you're an Indiana resident, which is the April 15th deadline, even if you have to go back and correct data later. So make sure that you meet the deadline. Same with the question that was earlier. If you have to get it in for a school by November 1, make sure you get it in, and you can always go back and update or correct data if it's not correct. Try to make it as correct as possible from the beginning, but know that you can make corrections if necessary.
Absolutely.
Any other questions out there?
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks to the person who found this helpful. We're always happy to do what we can.
Gonna help just one person today. That was the goal, right, Heidi?
Right, exactly. I think the other thing too to remember is that all of your local colleges and universities have staff, just like Sean and Alex and I. And whether you're looking at our institution or not, we're all very dedicated to helping students have access to higher education. And so don't hesitate to reach out. I know we often will have families who reach out to Purdue because we're known and they may be looking at 5 other schools, and that's okay. We're here to help you answer your questions about filing for aid. And I see Alex and Sean nodding, so I know they feel the same way. Many of us go out into our communities and do financial aid night presentations. We do presentations to college guidance counselors. So, you know, we try to help as best we can because we know the work that we do can be a little tricky sometime. Anytime you talk finance, you know, we sneak that word in there. It can be a little bit deceiving, but I promise once you get to it, it's not as difficult as it sometimes sounds like it can be, but we're here to help every step along the way.
Absolutely. Yeah. The FAFSA ID is more difficult than the FAFSA. So you get through the FAFSA ID portion, the FAFSA will be a breeze.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if any of you have any of the non-traditional questions on the FAFSA that, you know, you're not a married household with 2.5 kids, a dog, and a white picket fence, and you have what you feel like is an odd question, I'm probably the one that's going to answer it at UE. So definitely feel free to reach out to me at UE, and that's kind of one of my roles on the staff is figure things out with FAFSA issues.
And Alex, your comment about the FSA ID is a very important one. Just to remind our students and our parents on the call, you do have to have a social security number to be able to set up an FSA ID. So that's, and it unfortunately can't be a social security number just used for work. So if you don't, that doesn't mean you can't file the FAFSA. It just means you can't sign it electronically with that FSA ID. You'll have to print out a signature page, sign it, and send it in. So that's an important note as well.
Great point, Heidi.
All right. Well, I think we maybe are not getting any more questions, but we had some awesome questions. So thank you again to our panelists. This has been an amazing session, very informative. I know our families are super appreciative. I'm going to go ahead and share the last slide with a few more housekeeping items. To families, thank you again for joining us. When you close out of this session, there will be a very quick 4-question survey. If you wouldn't mind taking just a minute to fill that out, that would be wonderful, and we'd really appreciate it. And again, we encourage you to sign up for more sessions. There are so many sessions happening this week, next week, and the week after. Especially if you're interested in learning more about the institutions you heard from tonight, I highly recommend you check out those information sessions. And then again, this recording will be available at a later date, where you can check that out in case you want to view it at another time. So thank you again to our panelists. I really appreciate you all doing this for us, and I hope everyone has a great night.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. See you. Thank you.